Definitely, the Iranian response will be well studied, and according to the crime, it's not a well studied game. There are open time horizons and there are multiple objectives. Israel need to anticipate the response. And didn't Iran respond properly in Kurdistan, Iraq, and after the assassination of General Soleimani? In general, Israel has gone crazy, breaking all red lines, breaking all international agreements and conventions. And according to science, this is a case of dire psychotic activity, and this applies to Netanyahu and his government after the Aqsa battle. Where is he taking the entire region, and what about the role of the US? Netanyahu washed his hands from attacking the consulate, and he said that he did not know about it. Is this true? What about Washington for everything that has happened? It's clear that the entire world is on the brink of collapse between one crazy figure in the White House and another crazy figure in Tel Aviv. Faced with these developments, we're going to be asking two major questions. First of all, who breaks the rules and pushes the entire region to a real fire, and what lies in Washington's response, saying that it had no idea about the attack? We're going to be discussing this topic with Dr. Marcus Papadopoulos, expert in international affairs. He's live with us from London. Welcome, Dr. Papadopoulos. First of all, with reference to the rules of engagement, what does it mean that Israel has engaged in this attack, specifically against the Iranian Consulate in Damascus?
Well, this latest act of Israeli aggression is not only a flagrant violation of international law and the United Nations Charter, but it is also a flagrant violation of an internationally adhered to norm, namely that embassies and consulates are never to be targeted with military force, that Israel has bombed the Iranian consulate in Damascus, killing members of the consulate inside, is another stark reminder of how Israel acts above the law and how Israel acts with impunity. And quite frankly, the rest of the world should hang its heads in shame because of how it never takes direct action against Israel to punish the Israeli state for its violent, brutal violations of international law, the United Nations Charter, and now with how Israel has bombed a consulate. But the question we have to ask ourselves is this: why has Israel bombed the Iranian consulate in Damascus? I am of the firm opinion that we need to view this latest act of aggression by Israel in the context of the war in Gaza, because the Israeli military has become bogged down in Gaza, and therefore the Israeli military is not thus far achieving its objectives in Gaza. Together with that is the reality that America is starting to distance itself from Israel in the context of the war in Gaza, only because the Israelis are murdering Palestinian civilians, including women and children, in full view of the rest of the world. So, I believe the Israelis have put together a trap. By bombing the Iranian consulate in Damascus, the Israelis are hoping that the Iranians will respond to this with military force against Israel. And then Israel will be able to turn to America and say, we in Israel have been subjected to a violent attack by Iran. Therefore, you, America, must come to our aid by attacking Israel.
You do consider that the main objective behind the Israeli attack against the Iranian consulate is basically to drag the region into a wider war, and as a result to drag the US into the war. Do you think that Israel would succeed in this attempt, and do you think that the US is perhaps looking into the possibility of engaging in a wider war, whereas it said that it wasn't planning on doing so several occasions before?
Fortunately, I believe that this latest act of Israeli aggression will not lead to a wider war. Why? because, firstly, the Iranian government is well aware of the very devious means that the Israelis employ in West Asia, principally against Iran. Therefore, calm heads exist in Tehran. The Iranian government will not fall into this trap that the Israelis have set. And secondly, it is not in the interests of America for there to be a war in the Middle East. This would only jeopardize America's strategic hold over West Asia. So I do believe on this occasion that the Americans were not involved in any way in the Israeli attack on the Iranian consulate in Damascus, and I do not believe that the Americans had advance warning of the Israeli attack on the Iranian consulate in Damascus. The Americans, as I said, whilst they will always support Israel because Israel is the main conduit for American influence and power in the Middle East, nonetheless, the Americans will not become embroiled in a war with Iran. So I believe that in private, the Americans, as we speak now, will be shouting at the Israelis for this act of Israeli aggression. The Americans know that the Israelis are trying to incite a war between Iran and America, and America will not fall into that trap, and at the same time, Iran will not fall into that trap. We also see how Israel is attempting to initiate a war in the Middle East by provoking Hezbollah.
Papadopoulos, I would like to ask you the following. Given all of these reasons, do you think this is why the U.S. has informed Iran that it did not know about the attack against the Iranian Consulate in Damascus, and this was quoted by an American official to Axios? Should we believe this kind of media leak, and more importantly, would Iran accept this version of the story from the US?
Well, anyone who is familiar with the politics of West Asia will know that American foreign policy is one of the most duplicitous, not just in the region, but in the world as a whole. That said, however, on this occasion, I do believe that the message which the Americans communicated to the Iranian government is sincere, only because it is not in the interests of America for there to be a war in the Middle East. That would cause immense damage to American interests in the region, and that could bring about the end of American mastery in the Middle East. So yes, I do believe the Americans on this occasion are sincere. But as I said, the Israelis are trying to provoke another war in the Middle East by provoking Hezbollah. And so far, Hezbollah has acted in a very rational way, as I believe the Iranian government will. Hezbollah will not walk into the trap that the Israelis have set. And the Iranians, no doubt, they will take some sort of action in response to the killing of, to the murdering of Iranian personnel in the consulate in Damascus, but they will not fall into the trap of the Israelis, because whilst it's not in the interests of America to become embroiled in a war with Iran, it is also not in the interests for Iran to become embroiled in a war with America.
I would like to ask you, Dr. Papadopoulos, about the following. You've also mentioned that in Iran there are reasonable heads and wise leadership regarding what Israel has done. Israel has violated the international law and the rules of engagement. But until when can we rely on the wisdom of Iranian leaders? Doesn't the strategic patience have borders and limits, sir?
The Iranian government has long been exposed to the violent, devious measures of not just Israeli foreign policy, but also American foreign policy. And in spite of that, the Iranian revolution is still alive to this day, is still in existence, and is thriving. And that is in part because the Iranian leadership know the tactics of the Israelis, and they also know the tactics of the Americans. Whilst Iran has developed a very powerful military force which can defend Iran, which can defend the Iranian people, which can defend Iranian independence and sovereignty, nonetheless, the Iranian military cannot, of course, compare with the American military. America is a military and nuclear superpower, and there is no disgrace in that for Iran. That is why I say the Iranians will take countermeasures, but they will ensure that they do not become embroiled in a war with America. Because if Iran becomes embroiled in a war with America, then the whole of the region will go up in flames. And yes, the Americans will lose an immense amount in the Middle East, but so will the Iranians. And that is how Iran's independence and sovereignty could be threatened. So the Iranians will not fall into the Israeli trap. And as I said, the Americans will not fall into the trap of the Israelis. The way the Israelis have been behaving since last October is peculiar.
I would also like to ask you, Dr. Papadopoulos, given all of these givens, what are the expected scenarios for a potential Iranian retaliation? The Supreme Guide has said that the retaliation will be made by Iran's strong men. So what do you think?
Well, naturally, I am not privy to the discussions of the Iranian government, but it could involve, for example, giving further support to Hezbollah. It could involve increasing the Iranian military presence in Syria, which is at the wishes of the Syrian government. Therefore, it is legal under international law. Iran, the Iranian government, could also provide further assistance to the government of Yemen and the Houthis. So I do not believe that the response of the Iranian government will be blatant. I do not believe it will be direct against Israel, but it certainly will be aimed at Israeli interests in the Middle East.
Before we pursue our discussion with you, Dr. Papadopoulos, let's watch this quick report about an article regarding Ehud Barak, Israel's former prime. Ehud Barak considers that Netanyahu's government is moving from one failure to the other, and if it is not overthrown, the war of attrition that started on October 7 will not end. According to Ehud Barak, there are three major failures. The first one is the failure of Netanyahu's theory that Hamas is an organization that can be bought off by millions of dollars, and that the authority is a hurdle, and that it's possible to normalize ties with the Saudis while overlooking the Palestinian cause. The second failure is that the victory is only a few months away, whereas no progress is being made, and in the north the displaced are left to their own fate, and at any moment there could be a wider scale war with Hezbollah. And the third failure is about the strategic path of the war. It's ill-founded, and it's due to the fact that Netanyahu is not taking any strategic decisions, either about the hostages the next day in Gaza, the war in Rafah, or the relationship with the US. How will the government be overthrown? This is what Barak asks and answers by saying that the key word is with Eisenkot, Gantz, and Lapid, who are overlooking what Netanyahu are doing and consider that Israel is in a downfall, and as a result they need to act in order to overthrow the present government. Based on this article by Ehud Barak, Dr. Papadopoulos, we're going to be discussing what is happening inside Israel specifically. Usually, Netanyahu spares no opportunity to attack Iran, either in his statements in the United Nations, or when we see that for years he worked on creating a regional alliance in order to counter Iran. So this is why I would like to ask you the following, Dr. Papadopoulos. Personally, how will Netanyahu reap the benefits or the results of the latest attack in Syria internally in Israel?
Well, is it really the case that the war in Gaza is Netanyahu's war? I do not subscribe to that argument. I believe that most of the Israeli ruling elite are in favour of the war in Gaza. And I believe that if Netanyahu was not Prime Minister last year, if someone else in Israel was Prime Minister, I believe the Israeli state would have taken the same action. Because I do believe that the long-term goal of the Israelis, not Netanyahu alone, the Israelis in Gaza, is to take control of Gaza, is to expel either all or most of the Palestinian inhabitants of the region, and then for Israel to annex Gaza. Now, in regard to Netanyahu's role in all of this, well, clearly he is a very controversial politician, to say the least. Indeed, he's actually a murderous politician, and it is more than conceivable that he is arguing non-stop for the war to go on in Gaza, because he is facing numerous corruption charges which could see him sent to prison. So that could be a reason for him persisting with this war. But again, this is not one man's war. It is not a case in Israel that one man decides on an Israeli military campaign or Israeli foreign policy. No, most of the Israeli ruling elite are in favour of this. And then that takes me to discussing what happened to the Iranian Consulate in Damascus, because the IDF are not progressing in Gaza. They need to try and open up another front. And the best way for the Israelis to do that is to provoke the Iranians. Provoke the Iranians into taking direct military action against Israel. Israel can then say to America and Britain and the rest of the Western world, which will then be spun by Western mainstream media, that Israel, the beacon of democracy and freedom and the rule of law in the Middle East, has been attacked by the Antichrist, so to speak, in the form of Iran. Iran is the bogeyman in the West. Then there would be a lot of pressure on the American government to take retaliatory measures against Iran. But so far, it seems the Americans will not respond to this blatant Israeli provocation.
Perhaps what you're saying is a reality for most, sir, and we all know that it's not only about one man. Israel, the elite, as you said, wants this war and wants a vital and deadly war. But there is an article by a Russian website that included an interesting saying. It says that Israel has done everything so that the history would tell us later on that Israel has committed suicide. What do you think about this saying, sir? And do you think it's plausible?
I have to admit that I personally am perplexed by Israel's behaviour since October of last year. We all know that ever since 1948, the Israelis have been murdering Palestinian civilians. They have been tormenting Palestinian civilians, including women and children. But they did so in private. And when they were accused of doing that, they always denied it. That has changed since October of last year, by which we see the Israelis in full view of the world openly murdering Palestinian civilians, including women and children. And when they are accused of doing so, Israeli officials admit to it. Now, that is not in the interests of Israel, and that is not in the interests of America. America is starting to distance itself from Israel in the context of the war in Gaza only because the Israelis are murdering Palestinian civilians in public. Not because they're murdering Palestinian civilians per se, no. The Americans want to see the Israelis murder Palestinian civilians in private, not in public, because by murdering Palestinians in public, that looks very, very bad for America's image in the world, the facade that America is the defender of mankind and civilization in the world. So again, the Americans in private will be irate with the Israelis. They will be telling them, asking them, why are you doing this in public? This is bad for America's image. And as I said, this is bad for Israel's image. Israel presents itself to the world, and Western mainstream media does the same. It presents itself as the beacon of civilization in the Middle East. Well, we all know that that is a falsehood. But why are the Israelis changing? Why are they murdering Palestinians in public?
Papadopoulos, you've been live with us from London, expert in international affairs. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, Dr. Papadopoulos. I'm sorry, but the time ran out.
Not at all. Thank you very much for the wonderful translations.